Hi, I'm Dieco Cupolo. I'm the editor-in-chief of Turkey Recap, a newsletter on Turkish politics and foreign affairs based in Ankara, Turkey. And today we're going to talk about Turkish politics with some foreign policy so far this year in 2025, between January and the beginning of June of 2025. There's been a lot of movement in Turkish domestic politics, but it also has regional implications. I think that in the midst of the Ukraine war and the Israel war, Turkey's been overlooked in international news. But I'm going to try to break down some dynamics that are going on here and talk about why they might have big influences on whatever happens elsewhere in the region. To give a quick outline, there's three main developments. There's a crackdown on the main opposition in Turkey, a lot of democratic backsliding after a decade of democratic backsliding. So we're going more severe towards anti-democratic measures here. At the same time, we have a peace process with Kurdish rights movement and the PKK, which could potentially expand rights to certain groups as we're seeing democratic backsliding against the opposition. It's linked. I'll get to it. And throughout the whole ordeal, as always in recent talks, economic challenges continue in Turkey. It's very difficult to exist on average wages in Turkey. The prices remain high, the lira remains weak, and there's a lot of difficulty, let's say, among citizens. And I think that all of these dynamics are connected through Erdoğan's ambition to stay in power and keep dissent under control. So between these three dynamics, basically Erdoğan has been trying to divide the opposition and design the political landscape where he'll compete or his party will compete in future elections. And main trends that we're seeing is removing challengers and keeping that economic discussion under control, because there are many reasons to protest. And I think that dividing the opposition and controlling opposition is all part of keeping critical voices silent at the moment. So to get through it, I'm going to try to break it down very simply. We have a crackdown on the CHP, the main opposition party, Republican People's Party in English. Basically, there's been different arrests on mayors that were democratically elected around the country, but the main mayor that was arrested, Istanbul Mayor Ekrem İmamoğlu, he went to jail on March 19th, 2025, and has been there ever since. He's facing all kinds of legal investigations, too many to list. They involve insulting public officials to corruption, bid rigging, lots of vague references to collaborating with terrorism. At the same time, he's been in pretrial detention in a jail near Istanbul, and he continues to have a voice, and people continue to hear from him through his lawyers. But it seems like the Turkish government has been trying to stop that communication line by getting X, or formerly Twitter, to ban his accounts. You may have heard after İmamoğlu was arrested, there were mass protests in Turkey throughout March. Many of these were not organized by any specific party. They were generally anti-Erdoğan protests. Many people were disappointed with this anti-democratic measure. This is because İmamoğlu presents the most formidable competitor that Erdoğan would have to face in future elections. He would be a likely presidential candidate. So by putting him in jail and having all these investigations and having TV news, which is often pro-government, showing different stories about why he's corrupt before trial, many people see this as unfair and anti-democratic. I should say that those big protests that are unorganized are kind of petering out as we go into the summer months. But we do have organized protests by the CHP. They're organizing 2 rallies a week, led by the CHP chair called Özgür Özel. And he has been leading different rallies. He's been trying to keep up the energy, keep up the focus on these as this judicial pressure increases on his party. But at the same time, we see waves of arrests on different elected officials in Istanbul, especially different mayors of different districts and their deputy mayors, all based on corruption charges linked to various vague accusations, often from secret witnesses. Turkish judicial process relies heavily on secret witnesses in these political cases. So long-term trajectory, we don't have elections on the horizon in Turkey. The next election, presidential election, would be scheduled by 2028 or earlier. And this kind of pressure on the opposition might just become normalized, is the fear. And basically, İmamoğlu would fade from daily news headlines. And by the time we're in elections 2 or 3 years from now, there might be another competitor, and we'll have to see where we're at because Erdoğan has been mounting his criticism of the opposition throughout. At the same time, we have the second big dynamic, which is the peace process. This began in 2024, late 2024, with discussions, but then we heard from the PKK leader. PKK is the Kurdistan Workers' Party terrorism group here in Turkey, designated terror in EU and US, but it's led by Abdullah Öcalan, a leader that's been jailed since 1999 here in Turkey. So it's almost 25 years since he was jailed. He after what we understand was about a year of negotiation with the state, Öcalan came out with a statement that basically called for the dissolution and disarmament of the PKK. This was publicized on February 27th, 2025. It was surprising because most people knew that there was some kind of negotiation going on, but we don't know what the incentives or the concessions are from both sides. And I'll try to get into those briefly here because we're still trying to understand those. Basically, since that February 27th call to disarm, the PKK had a Congress in May. And on May 12th, it was publicized that the PKK announced it would disarm and dissolve. Whether this impacts Syria remains to be seen, but the PKK elsewhere in the region has many branches, appears to be on a move to disarm. That's a very technical process. Iraq and other local governments are trying to help in the weapons collection process and oversight, but we haven't seen those details formalized, and we're waiting for those. So what it looks like to actually disarm has yet to be seen. I should mention, in Turkey, this is generally not popular, this peace process, because many people see it as a trick. Erdoğan trying to stay in power by creating new allies with the Kurdish movement. Dem Party represents Kurds in Turkey that want expanded rights. And generally, the population is anti-Kurdish rights, let's say. There's a lot of Turkish nationalists that don't approve of this ideologically, but at the same time, the country is split down the middle. Half of the people vote for Erdoğan, right? So the people that don't vote for him also don't want him to be pulling any new alliances that might increase his chances of staying in power indefinitely. There's domestic and regional impacts. I'm going to go through both. So domestically, the state gets stability in theory, a new ally in parliament. Dem Party could, in theory, help Erdoğan pass new amendments for the constitution. That's the narrative. Erdoğan has a term limit coming up. He wants to expand presidential term limits so that he can have another run potentially in 2028 or 2027. And domestically, it helps him consolidate power and divide the opposition, because in previous elections, Dem Party, the Kurds, allied with the CHP, the main opposition party, to successfully elect many anti-Erdoğan candidates in different regions. So this kind of splits that alliance and potentially favors Erdoğan domestically. In the region, what does the state get? It gets reduced threats in high instability. There's a lot of movement in the Middle East, Israel, Iran, Gaza. Basically, the rhetoric here in Turkey, whether you believe it or not, is that Kurds can be used by different state actors to undermine Turkey, basically. So whether it's Israel or Iran wants to use some kind of militia to attack Turkey in these unstable times to gain leverage, the way that Ankara sees it is we should work with the Kurds directly and prevent them from being exploited by others. At the same time, it also gives Turkey more leverage in the transition that's happening right now in Syria. Since the regime change in Syria, Damascus has been trying to centralize armed forces. There was a March 10th agreement between the Kurdish militia there, it's called SDF, and the central government. And basically, Turkey has a heavy hand in what's happening in Syria. We can say that they're highly linked to the developments there, Ankara. And by having some kind of peace negotiation here in Turkey, expanding Kurdish rights, it also creates leverage over what Kurds in Syria will do, because it is part of a similar rights movement where you have similar ideologies about expanding Kurdish rights. And I'll get into those right now. What does the Kurdish rights movement get inside Turkey for agreeing to doing this peace process? Generally, it's rights that are already guaranteed by existing laws, but they're not being applied. So, for example, elected politicians don't get to keep their seats in Kurdish parties in recent years. They get elected and then they're removed on terror charges and replaced with state-appointed trustees. It's a very undemocratic process. I don't know why they're allowed to run if they are terrorists, but that's how it happens here. And basically, this is happening to the CHP now. They're getting similar kind of pressure. And what we're seeing domestically in Turkey is that maybe Dem Party would be able to keep the seats it wins in elections. That would be one concession, but that's the way it should be anyway, according to the laws. It's just not being applied. So that's very vague. At the same time, there's another vague concession that they might gain, which is expanded Kurdish cultural rights and language rights, which is the cause of the Kurdish rights movement. If people don't mention it often enough, Kurdish language, Kurdish culture is seen as kind of separatist because of the Öcalan PKK ideology. But for many people, it's their native language. It's a language that's existed a long time in the region. So it's not necessarily separatism. It's just who they are, and they're not allowed to be that. And so alternative is take up politics, take up arms. And yeah, the peace process is positive in the sense that it's offering a political solution to what has been an armed conflict for more than 40 years. In the region, Kurds also seek to keep their foothold in northeast Syria. As you might know, Kurdish groups helped eradicate Islamic State forces with US support, and they basically kept a lot of that territory. The issue is that it's not a Kurdish majority area, northeast Syria. There's many ethnic Arabs in this region, and they might reject Kurdish minority rule. And right now, this is part of the agreement that's being discussed inside Damascus between the Kurdish groups and the Ahmed al-Shara, the new Syrian president. So we have to see what kind of agreement they'll come to. The reason for pursuing this peace process is to keep that area somewhat operated by Kurdish militias as it is now, maybe with some centralized armed forces through agreements with Damascus. At the same time, US wants to scale down its force presence in Syria. The Trump administration has been repeating this in Trump 1 and Trump 2, and that means that Syrian Kurds need to work with regional allies to keep whatever they've gained in the last decade, because the US is not going to be there to do their bidding, basically protect them from different dynamics in the future. Also, I should mention, if you're a Kurdish militia or group, a Kurdish rights group, and you're looking around the region right now, and you're looking for allies between Arabs, Shia militias, Iran, Israel, Turkey is the least bad option. And that's how the calculation goes. So even if it's counterintuitive because there's been a 40+ year war between Turkey and the PKK, Turkey remains the only state that's really reaching out and offering sustained solution to some kind of peace and coexistence. Other ones would be transactional and short term is the calculation. So to say what's going on with this peace process, because it's a bit complicated, but I'll just say negotiations are underway. Dem Party is the intermediary here in Turkey, and they're discussing between the public and the government. They're doing the messaging, but Öcalan is the one negotiating with the state, and he's basically leading the talks, and he's described that way by the Kurdish movement. They call him the chief negotiator. So immediate results have been basically to create a parliamentary commission to oversee the transition away from armed conflict and work out the details on how disarming will work and all that. At the same time, the Dem Party has been lobbying for expanded rights for political prisoners and sick prisoners. Right now, there's different sentences, jail sentences in Turkey, where someone who is very ill or elderly has to remain in jail, and many end up dying in jail. Basically, the Dem Party is trying to amend laws so that they can at least political prisoners or other sick prisoners with the Kurdish movement can be transferred to house arrest or get some kind of amnesty towards the end of their lives. So small concessions to start with, but meaningful for them. And also, Öcalan, I should mention, is a lot of the discussion, we don't have clear details, is that he's getting improved detention conditions, like his personal ability to function is being expanded as he becomes a negotiator. And we recently saw a long text published from Öcalan, which everybody could read here in Turkey, which is not a normal thing to happen, where Öcalan can directly discuss his ideology with Turkish public. So that might be part of the concessions. Third topic, economic challenges. I'll just go briefly because I've been talking for a while. The economic growth remains low, 2% year on year, first quarter in 2025. Weakening consumption as a result, declining investment, lots of instability. We also remain high on inflation. It's slowing, inflation is cooling, but we're still at 35% as of May 2025. The result is that people's consumption and purchasing power is really taking a hit. It's really expensive to go anywhere in Turkey to function as a normal middle-class citizen. Can barely afford some vacations or travel at this point. So we're seeing a lot of discontent, a lot of complaints about prices. They are comparable to some European countries when you're shopping, and the wages are not comparable to European countries. So the conclusion of all these trends is that there are many reasons to protest in Turkey, and there's a crackdown on the opposition, which is removing alternatives to the Erdoğan government. This is a reason for people to protest. There's outreach to Kurdish groups, which is dividing the opposition and strengthening Erdoğan and his government. This is a reason for people to protest. And the declining purchasing power and the daily economic pain that is just felt so clearly when you're here in Turkey. This is a reason to protest, and people are not protesting. So I think that what we're understanding is Erdoğan's consolidating power. He's removing dissenting voices, and he's really made a clear trend since January 2025 that he will not tolerate any kind of opposition or criticism. And this was underlined by the first major arrest this year, which was far-right nationalist party leader, Umit Özdağ. He went to jail in January. He's been there ever since. it's not about his ideology, it's that he was pushing back on government policies. So I think what's happening in Turkey is that any dissent squashed, and Erdogan's government and AKP is establishing hegemony inside Turkey, and that's the clear trend line. Thank you for listening. This is again Dieco Cupolo with Turkey Recap, the newsletter on Turkish politics and foreign affairs, turkeyrecap.com, to understand more about Turkish dynamics, politics, everything Turkey. Visit our website. Thank you.